The singer-songwriter Donovan wrote these words: "In the chilly hours and minutes of uncertainty I want to be, in the warm hold of your loving arm, to feel you all around me, and to take your hand along the sand. Ah, but I may as well try and catch the wind." Today is Trinity Sunday. It's a Sunday when we are celebrating the mystery of the Trinity, that God is presented to us as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or in more modern interpretations, the God who creates us, redeems us, and sustains us. When it comes to the nature of God, Jesus in John's Gospel uses an image that's similar to the one in the Donovan song. He talks about God as being like the wind. You don't know where the wind comes from or where it's going, but you can see the effects of what the wind is doing. In the epistles we read that God is a spirit, and those who worship God must worship God in spirit. But how do we catch the wind? How do we talk to a breeze? How do you embrace a cloud? You and I, as human beings, need images. We need pious metaphors to give us some way to relate to a God who is spiritual and hard to connect to. And in all religions, there's a spectrum between those whose images of God are displayed with a fullness of talents of artists of all different mediums, to those on the other end of the spectrum who think you don't even pronounce the name of the divine. And even within Christianity, you have this same spectrum too, from those who use all kinds of creative images to display what God is like, to those who believe that you just read and talk about what's in the Scriptures. Well, as human beings, we need an image, something that we can relate to as a way of connecting with God. But if we get fixated on just one image, then we limit the nature of God. And that can also run the risk of turning into a false idol, limiting who God is for us. So we have multiple images and metaphors and ways of talking about God. I've reflected to you before the hymn number 113 in your hymn, Source and Sovereign, Rock and Cloud. That hymn is one that came about as a result of a challenge. Whenever the 1989 hymnal, which is the version we still use in the thick hymnal book, came out, some of the editors of the hymnal, who were professors of the Bible and of sacred music, gathered what they found were 200 names for God in all of the Scriptures. And they sent these out to professors of worship and sacred music and invited them to write a hymn using as many different terms as they possibly could. The professor that wrote Source and Sovereign, Rock and Cloud used 40 out of those 200 terms. And there are 3 verses in that hymn, one for each person of the Trinity. So the first one looks at God as a creator, as a father. The second one as God as a redeemer, as the Word made incarnate. And the third one as the Spirit, the wind, the cloud, and the dove. And the chorus of that particular hymn celebrates the oneness of God. So one way of looking at the Trinity, it's a way of giving us images for how to relate to God without having us fixate on any one particular image, because that leads to idolatry, and it limits the nature of God, and it limits our ability to experience God. Shirley Guthrie is a Presbyterian church historian and theologian. And in her book on church dogmatics, she talks about the theology of the Trinity as being like a spider web. It's interconnected. Whatever happens here is felt down at this end of the web. So each person of the Trinity is connected one to the other. It's not something we're meant to fully understand or fully explain, but rather it's something that we profess and we celebrate. It might be easier to consider what the Trinity is not. It's not polytheism. It's not three separate gods working together. It's not a hierarchy where the Father is greater than the Son and the Spirit subservient to the Son. It's not a chronology where one exists and then the other exists and then the third. That passage we read this morning from Proverbs 8 encourages us to think about how the Redeemer, the Son, how is present at creation. And it's also not meant to divide up God and say God is a third this, a third that, and a third the other. Don't get out your calendar, or your calculator on your phone and try to add this up, because it doesn't divide. But it's simply a device for helping us talk about and conceptualize God. Something that the church argued and debated about for hundreds of years. When the church finally got together to write the Nicene Creed, that's the one that's on the opposite page from the Apostles' Creed we normally do, it took them 3 years to come up with that one paragraph. And it's actually not a subject that's a topic of debate and who won and who lost, but a great compromise, where they recognized all of these different images and attributes of God, and they decided, you know what, they're all true. Let's just put them together and celebrate the God that is three in one. Another helpful image that I heard one time for the Trinity, to experience the Trinity is a dance. We dance from one image to another, back and forth between these three images, celebrating the nature of who God is and not being fixated on any one. And if we're going to dance, we'll need some musical accompaniment. And if you notice today in our congregational hymns, we have 3 hymns as usual, and each one focuses on a different person of the Trinity. Verses 1 and 3 of How Great Thou Art look at God who creates and then God who sends the Son. What we just sang, Jesus Shall Reign, looks at the triumphant Son, the one who after the ascension ascends back up into heaven and continues to reign. And our closing hymn today, Spirit of the Living God, invites us to consider the mysterious wind that surrounds us. It's not math, it's not hierarchy, but it's a sacred dance that we continue to celebrate as we worship a God who is three in one, a God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, a God who created the world and us, who gave all to redeem us, and who continues to sustain and to surround us. And now let us affirm our belief in this triune God. And today I invite you to stand as we read 881, the Apostles' Creed traditional version. Let us recite this as Lord's confession. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven